Morning,
How are
everyone.
you?
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the Assembly Housing and Homelessness Committee to order. I am Assembly Member George Martinez, sitting in as the in-person chair today for Member Salt, who is the co-chair, who is joining us on the phone, and also to note that Assembly Member Perez Verdia is excused today, but we'll begin with member introductions, and we'll start in person.
Karen Braga.
Zach Johnson.
On the phone, Mr.
Randy
Salt.
Salt, and thank you, Chair, for stepping in.
Thank you. Mr. Myers.
Scott Myers.
Thank you, sir. Great. And if there are any other members, please make yourself known on the phone. Thank you. And we will begin with our first order of business, the administration updates. Mr. Salt, do you have a motion to change the order of the day, sir?
Yes, Chair. If Jessica Parks is online, I'd like to request to move ACH data review forward to ahead of the administration.
I don't see Jessica. I don't hear that Jessica is on the phone. Is there an objection to that from committee members? The administration, any objection to that? Mr. Salt, there is no objection to changing the order of the day to have the presentation from the ACEH data review moved up prior to the administration's report, so we can do that. Also to note, Member Perez Verdia has also joined us on the phone. Thank you, sir. Great. We'll begin with the update. We changed the order of the day, and we'll begin with the ACEH data review. Ms. Parks, are you on the line with us?
I am, through the chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you so much for having me here and the opportunity to talk a little bit about our current system overview and what our data is looking like right now. So on the screen, what Travis is sharing is our data snapshot that is on our website. This is a joint effort. The coalition does post this on here, and the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS lead agency, ICA, works with our Built for Zero dashboards and updates that information with the data out of HMIS. So starting at the top, this is data that's current as of March 31st, 2025. At the end of March 31st, or at the end of March, we had 3,004 people actively experiencing homelessness here in Anchorage. The definition of literal homelessness is defined as shelter, which would include seasonal shelter, transitional housing, and people who are unsheltered in our community. You can see in this box at the top a breakdown of who those 3,004 people are and where they are. So when we break that down between subpopulations, we have 2,130 single adults. When I say single adults, that could also mean adults that are in a household with another adult significant other, so in a couple. But in this situation, they're counted as single adults. 272 are unaccompanied youth, or what we call transition age youth, which are youth age 18 to 24. And then 602 are people in families. So that's not the number of individual families, it's the people within those families. When we look at where people are, we do this in a couple different ways. We look at our shelter and transitional housing capacity, which has all been running at 100% utilization. And this does include our emergency cold weather shelter capacity, which, as we know, is winding down over the next few months. Hopefully, though, seeing some other shelter capacity come online during that time frame or shortly after as well. And then this last box that is 733 set to go inactive over 90 days. What we have in our community is an inactive policy that if someone goes 90 days without having contact with a provider or a program in our homeless prevention and response system, they're dropped as inactive. If they come back, they would return from that inactivity and be active in our system again. All right, so scrolling down, if you could scroll down just a little bit, underneath here is, this is the part that comes directly from our HMIS information. So this is our Built for Zero snapshot. On the top right corner of this, you can see a drop-down box where you can choose which month you want to look at. It will default to the current month, which is March of 2025. Breaking down our inflow and outflow. Our inflow is people who come into our homeless prevention and response system. So we start with a number that is the end of the prior month. So in this case, February 28th. We then add people who have come into our system. We subtract people who have left our system, and we come up with a new number, which is how many are active at the end of that month. When we look at inflow, we have 3 different ways people come into our homeless prevention and response system. They are either new to the system, which means that they are experiencing homelessness for the first time, or it has been more than 24 months since they have experienced homelessness in our community, in our system. The second box is people who are returning from housing. So this is someone who has exited our system to a housed situation and now are returning to homelessness. And the third box is returning from inactive. So I mentioned our 90-day inactive policy. These are people who had more than 90 days without interacting with a program in our HPRS and now are returning to homelessness from that inactivity. The outflow box are people that are exiting our homeless prevention and response system. There are 2 ways that people can exit. They can exit to housing. So you see that house box. That is to a permanent destination. So it can be housing by themselves. It could be permanent reunification with friends or family. But it does not include any exits to a temporary destination. So if you are exiting to a transitional housing program, HUD defines that as continuing to meet the definition of literal homeless. And then the box of people who went inactive. That's the other way that you would exit our system, is that you would exit to inactivity. Underneath this section, we have a breakdown that looks at race and ethnicity compared to our Anchorage census data. So as you can see in those boxes, we continue to see overrepresentation by some racial and ethnic groups and underrepresentation of others. Our highest overrepresentation is people who are American Indian or Alaska Native. 53.8% of the people experiencing homelessness in Anchorage fit into that category, compared to just over 14% of our overall census population. And across the top, you can see a plus or minus showing the over or under representation of those racial and ethnic breakdowns. Scrolling down just a tiny bit, at the very bottom of this box, you can see our inflow, which is our new to system inflow, also compared to that census information. So you can see the inflow coming in, what that over or under representation looks like as well. And then the last box shows our outflow to housing and what type of housing that was. So you can see we have a couple different categories there. We have people who have exited to housing to a permanent housing program. So this would be a program that is also participating in HMIS or in our HPRS that is tracking the exits to those programs. We then have 2 categories of exits to a rental or owned property with and without a subsidy. So that's going to show programs that either have rental assistance as part of that, or that person had rental assistance assigned to them already and moved to their own rental or ownership opportunity. And then the next category is exit to family or friends. that is only going to be permanent exits to staying with family or friends, not capturing a temporary situation. So if that person is only able to stay for a short period of time, that would not be a permanent exit. Happy to answer any questions people might have. And if you come up with them later, always happy to sit down and talk about any of the specific numbers in our HPRS and on these dashboards.
Thank you. There are first in the queue, Member Bronca.
Thank you for this, Ms. Parks. I biked in today and I noticed that along Delaney Park Strip, there was an individual sleeping in every spot. There was a bench. And if they were not touching ACH or being outreach, then they wouldn't even be on this chart. Is that correct? If they have not engaged in any possible sheltering, then they're just not even part of the equation. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, through the chair to Member Bronca, yes, that is true. I will say the potential for the touches is fairly large. The 3rd Avenue Navigation and Resource Center records when people visit that location. Our street outreach teams respond to and record and report anyone who is at a camp that has been reported through the GIS reporting module on the municipality website, as well as other street outreach teams that are using HMIS that might be out. And then any of our shelters, even if they just spend one night there within that 90 days, they will be counted.
Thank you.
Ms. Parks, I have a couple of questions, and any other members on the phone, if you have a question, just please feel free to give me a text and I'll get you in the queue. And really the questions, Ms. Parks, if you can just help me understand the data that you presented. If we can, Travis, if we can scroll down a little bit so I can see that, no, well, I guess the other way, yeah, right on the top of the dashboard. So I see a number, but can you give me a sense of what is the effective rate of return from housing back to unhoused? It seems that it's about 10% of the people that we touch, or even a bigger number than 10% return. I think it's almost a third, but I'm not sure what I'm looking at. So how do you determine what is the rate of return? If we were talking criminal policy, we'd say recidivism, but I don't think that's the fair term. So I don't know a better way to say that. What is the rate of return, essentially, Ms. Parks?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Member Martinez. Our rate of return for our permanent housing programs is about 15% for our system overall. That is something that is tracked as a more annual measure, but you are correct. If you were to look at the returns to homelessness and what percentage of those returns on this particular month were returns from housing, it would be just under 10%.
Right on. And essentially, do we know how many times folks have returned? Do we track the amount of revolving nature at an individual level if we are seeing the same 10% get returned, or is it a different 10% all the time? And is that 10% constant?
We don't have we have the ability to track it person by person. Our data sharing and privacy agreements in our homeless management information system wouldn't allow us to share that level of detail. It's always going to be aggregate. It could be the same people. It's usually different people though, and it does stay fairly steady around that 15% number year over year.
Thank you. Additionally, you described where people go to housing as the bottom box of the dashboard, and it described the different outputs to housing. But from those different outputs to housing, I'd like to get a relationship to the return from housing. essentially, which of those buckets on the bottom part of the slide, Travis, we can pull this outflow to housing, which of the buckets is least effective in keeping people housed? Which of those buckets is the most effective in keeping people housed? Is there a difference between housing with supports and the other buckets? Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. The most effective would be any type of housing that has that ongoing support. So the permanent housing program and the exit to rental or housing or rental or ownership with an ongoing subsidy, that helps keep the property affordable, but also ensures that that person has the right level of wraparound support to help them maintain that housing. I couldn't tell you which was the least effective out of the other two options there, but that is something that I can get that data. I can work with ICA and get that data for you.
Right on. I'd appreciate that. I think it'd be appreciated by other folks as well. And just to be clear, make sure I heard it correctly if I didn't. Is there a difference between the rate of return essentially from folks who receive supports or not? And how do we know?
Yeah, when I have that data, I would be able to answer that more clearly.
Thank you.
But anecdotally, I would say yes.
Right on. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other members with questions? Any other members on the phone? I don't see any other members with questions. Thank you, Ms. Parks.
Thank you.
Right on. Moving right along, we'll go now to the administration updates, and we have been joined by Farina Brown and Thea Agnew-Bemba. We'll turn it over to you, Farina Brown.
Good morning, Special Assistant to the Mayor, Farina Brown.
Good morning, Thea Agnew-Bemba, Special Assistant to the Mayor.
Well, typically, when we do our homelessness and health strategy update, we'll pick some key items out of the strategy document to speak to. But what I think I would like to do today is just to do a level set on our entire strategy document, just to anchor all of our members in what is the administration's goal over the next year. As I was kind of going through and preparing to review the document with the committee this morning, I was actually kind of proud of us in that this document was rolled out in October 2024. And since October 2024, we have maintained the direction that we identified in the strategy document. The strategy document is a dynamic living document that allows us the opportunity to look at what's happening in real time and then pivot and be nimble as needed. So as I'm going through this, I want you to know that there isn't anything that is kind of a concrete block that doesn't allow us to actually think about what we're doing, understanding what is the impact on the community, the individuals that we intended to serve, and then go back to the well to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. So I'm going to start all of you actually on the first page. So that is this handy dandy homelessness and health strategy right here. I am not going to read it to you, even though I would like to, because it's actually well written. One of the most important things that we say in this document is that we are looking at a comprehensive and coordinated strategy. In order to have a coordinated and comprehensive strategy, it is incumbent that we have partners that support all of the work that we do. When we as a community think about the work of the municipality, the mayor committed to that we would be the safety net providers, ensuring that we had a dedicated shelter system for individuals to engage in. And that then spun into some additional supports that we'll get to on the second page of this. But the coordinated approach requires that we lean on our partners that have been providing these services for more than 2 decades, which includes Brother Francis, Downtown Hope Center, our Clare House providers, Awake, a number of other entities that have really leaned in and supported our homelessness community for decades, that provide a level of expertise and engagement in the conversation. It then also requires that we partner with entities like the coalition, new providers that have come into the system that not only look at how are we addressing the immediate needs of homelessness, but what is that upstream work that needs to happen? How do we move people and connect them into housing and housing supports? So in our initial first page, what we say is that we want to improve the health and safety of our entire community, including those that are experiencing homelessness, with immediate action and long-term solutions. The immediate action piece is ensuring that we have a shelter system. When shelter was initially stood up, it was kind of a single site and it was a life, health, and safety model. What we've learned over time and through engagement with our partners, through engagement with folks with lived experience, is that a one-size-fits-all model is not how we're going to reduce unsheltered homelessness. The administration has leaned into fewer people sleeping outside and the need for safe alternatives. Alongside that, we are committed to enforcement of laws that keep our community safe, which includes a balance between increasing housing alongside a balanced approach to enforcement. There are many communities that have been and have housed their unhoused neighbors for some many weeks, others many months, others for a couple of years. The administration has been committed to abatement alongside standing up all of our other services. To date, since coming into office, the administration has abated 21 camps. Abatement is not an effective standalone strategy. Abatement is an enforcement strategy that supports the safety of the community, but without having those additional supports available for individuals, somewhere for them to land and to be connected, then we are not doing our community or the individuals that are touching those services, those that are camping outside, any difference. So what is different about what we are doing here in this administration? We are intentionally moving away from a reliance on a single mass shelter model. We are looking to a scatter site model that is redesigned, and it's smaller and it's a service-rich environment. In doing so, what we are doing is recognizing that the one-size-fits-all model does not meet the needs of every single person that we serve. I believe you've heard us testify before, as well as our partners with the coalition and other presenters that have been at this committee meeting, that individuals are just like us. They have their preferences and where they go. We are moving to a scatter site shelter model that provides linkage to case management. We anticipate that we will continue to serve up to 200 individuals, which is the baseline that we serve now, with the ability for surge capacity during the winter for 400 individuals. We learned using our warming site that even with the inclusion of our non-congregate shelter, we need the ability to flex and understand that inflow is something that requires a coordinated response and effort, but having prevention dollars at the top end of that does not stop the individual that says, today I lost my housing, my car was towed, where am I going? We have to have that immediate point for that individual to connect to services. The scatter site shelter model is directly tied back to goal number one, significantly reducing unsheltered homelessness through low barrier shelter and connections to housing. Coming into this position in August, I worked very closely with the health department that had already released the request for proposals for the upcoming congregate shelter season. Included in that was the need for case management. That has demonstrated for us, which then waterfalled through to what we're seeing in our current model, the number of individuals that have a high level of complexity. So when we say that we've added case management into our current shelter system, the reason that we really lean and push on this very hard is that life didn't just happen and someone woke up and today I'm just going to be homeless. The level of need and the difficulty in navigating social services, navigating Social Security, and getting back on one's feet really requires that there are individuals that can be in that space and consistently help that person. So having that linkage, not just to connecting that person to housing, but connecting them to behavioral health supports, connecting that individual to employment is how we turn the tide on what we're doing and not just continually repeating what we're seeing. To member Martinez's question about how many people are falling back into the system, the way that we reduce the number of individuals falling back into the system is through supports. I'll just jump to that now. We have $5 million in emergency rental assistance that will create a massive amount of change in the number of individuals that are currently experiencing homelessness that have the opportunity to move into housing. But it is also geared towards that stemming the number of individuals that are falling into being literally unsheltered. If we don't think about how we operate on both ends of that spectrum, then we are going to continually find ourselves in conversations where we are trying to expand the number of beds available, which we will never be able to outpace the need if we are not stemming those that are coming in and then moving those that are currently experiencing homelessness out into safe, stable housing. Increasing access to behavioral health and physical health. You've heard me say this. If we are not connecting and linking people, it's absolutely fantastic if we have partners that are going to help you get into emergency housing. But if I have untreated behavioral health, I am not going to be able to maintain that housing. So housing with supports, housing with linkage, and linkage in the shelter, linkage at every touch point in our continuum is necessary. It is hard for me to sit down and fill out a housing application if I am self-medicating through alcohol or other drugs to deal with my mental health issues. We often dismiss that individuals are experiencing significant behavioral health conditions and they are touching our shelter system. An individual does not want to not be in recovery, but if we are not providing them that access and linkage, then we are asking them to navigate a system that many of you yourselves have called me and said, can you provide me a resource? Can you help me figure out where to send this person? So I just want us to all think about from our own personal perspective, we're not dealing with mental health challenges. We're not dealing with the experience and the trauma of being homeless. And we still need help in being able to link to what is the next step in our continuum. That is the goal that we are establishing. As the administration is leaning into this first year, it is important that we have the ability to pivot and listen to what are the needs. It has been difficult for many people to think and know that at the end of this winter season, shelter is going to close down, and then where do I go? For a number of years, we have negatively reinforced that shelter will spin up, and then in the summer that we will spin down, and then individuals are left to figure it out for themselves. I am very grateful to work for an administration and with the support of the Assembly that funded year-round shelter. I am grateful to be a part of the conversation that recognizes that non-congregate shelter can be expensive, but we have seen the significant number of vulnerable individuals and elders that require and need something more than a congregate space. That non-congregate shelter allows for that intimate engagement. The individuals with the level of complexities that they have require navigation that often includes assisted living homes. It is not unknown to our community that we have a shortage of assisted living homes. It is difficult for someone who has experienced homelessness to try to navigate their paperwork, work with the state, and obtain the actual financial resources that are necessary while also dealing with the medical complexities. Alongside all of you, the administration, and the partners in the room, and I am going to really give a lot of credit to our partners with the coalition that really utilizing our coordinated entry and identifying who those vulnerable individuals are helped us to build a shelter system and a strategy that identifies what are all of the different needs and levels of service that we must make available as a part of our safety system. Again, I will be redundant intentionally, including linkage to behavioral health and other services as a part of that is absolutely necessary if we want to see something different. adding new housing and increasing access to existing housing. So the mayor has released the 10,000 homes, so I will not go into that. But there is no answer to homelessness that does not include housing. We can make available all of the case management and the immediate access to shelter and warming that we'd like. But if the individual is not able to move through our housing continuum, if it's through our tiny homes projects, if it's through low income, rentally subsidized housing, and then just creating housing in the market that allows individuals at all income levels to move and buy houses, that creates movement in our rental market, we are not going to solve this. So understanding that it is not just simply a homelessness solution, but it is a solution that also includes the critical importance of housing. Fourth on this list is harnessing community partnerships, funding, and data to reduce systemic contributors to homelessness. All of you have asked, what is the data? What does the data tell us? How are we being informed in the decisions that we make? Thank you for changing the order of the day to allow the coalition to present their data that demonstrates that what we do is not just something that we wake up and shake the magic 8 ball and say, this number feels really good. We partner and we look at what does the data tell us and how are we being informed. We have unfortunately moved into a time for many Americans, not just here in Alaska, not just here in Anchorage, where so many people are at risk or on the cusp. And the data, the inflow demonstrates painfully why we have to have a strategy, why we have to be able to be dynamic, nimble, and be able to pivot and have services at so many different levels for the way an individual may come into our system. It emphasizes the need, not just harnessing community partnerships, but bringing those individuals alongside us to inform what we do. Now we'll turn to my favorite part of the document. And it's not just simply because it has all of the check marks, but it's because it has all the check marks.
Just one note, Ms. Brown, just a note for the record, Member Brawley joined us at 11:29. Thank you.
Excellent. In our first 100 days, we had very big goals that we were able to achieve. Some of those might have been a little bit past October 8th, but some of the most important relationships that we have established is really bringing together all of our community partners, leaning into and using coordinated entry and the partnership with the Anchorage Police Department. You heard me say in the beginning, enforcement has been one of the founding principles for this administration, is that we recognize having individuals camping all of our green spaces is just not something that we can allow. While we are moving towards enforcement, the need to have outreach and engagement so that we are not just moving people along, but are we actually giving them somewhere to go, access, linkage. The partnership with the HOPE team, the Homeless Outreach Prevention and Engagement team operated by APD, has been invaluable in creating relationships and actually being able to come back and spend time with people that had negative feelings about the police, that aren't really interested in engaging with our traditional outreach. But after that over and over again contact, we've seen those individuals into warming, into our shelter system. And many of those folks have moved into housing because they had those initial places to land. We identified that we would continue the 200 beds of warming at our congregate shelter. We stood up an additional 332 beds of non-congregate. We had high hopes of 400, but we weren't able to achieve that goal. Alongside that, Thea has been spearheading the work in our behavioral health and health partnerships to ensure that we have those linkages and relationships across the board. You've heard me speak to the development of the mayor's housing strategy. We have partners like, while it's one small tiny home community, in our backyard has been a catalyst for so many community conversations that we've leveraged in moving our own project for micro units. Data and funding. We have our coalition partners here every month, because without the data, it makes what we do really just an exercise in shaking the magic 8 ball. Having partnerships, talking to individuals with lived experience, reaching out to other funders. How do we leverage not just muni dollars, but how do we bring in additional dollars to support something that is very expensive, but also extremely necessary? I think into the first 100 days, it was a lot of past 6 o'clock evenings, but it was completely worth the work and building the relationship with the assembly to understand how do we do this together. In our first year, coming up on June 30th, we have continued. Those check marks are not there just simply because it looks good, but it's because we've actually achieved and hit these targets. The ongoing work with our HOPE team, addressing individuals that are living in vehicles. A part of our multi-pronged strategy is rolling out designated parking that we've been able to bring alongside the State of Alaska Department of Transportation into that conversation, which is looking at locations for designated parking alongside MOA sites. They've also agreed to partner to look at locations for our micro units. So as you think about the work that's being done, we don't often talk about all of the nuanced details, but it is an everyday ongoing process of bringing along those partners because it is a shared accountability and a shared system of work that we do. The MOA cannot be responsible for bearing all of the costs of supporting homelessness from the downstream impacts to the upstream. We have to bring everyone together. We have established, we are still working, so there's a check mark under this one that we will deselect. Transportation continues to be something that is incredibly difficult. All of our partners through our MOA operated shelters provide bus tickets and transportation for individuals in the shelter, but as we all know, homelessness and the need for transportation is much bigger than those that are just touching our MOA supported shelter system. So that one is one that we will correct and that we're still working on. Partnering with ACEH on really helping us understand through HMIS, what does the data tell us? Are we spending dollars in the right way? And we understand from the data that we need dollars that move individuals from homelessness to housing, but that prevention piece, stemming that flow is critical. We talked about developing an RFP for rapid rehousing for approximately 75 people. I think Thea has an updated number on the number of people we think we can support for rapid rehousing. So we think that we're looking at probably about 150 people that we'll be able to support with that. So we're really happy to surpass the 75 individuals. The rapid rehousing piece is important when we think about our overall plan for the summer. We have to create flow in our system. When I say flow in the system, that means that an individual using one of our shelter beds is not in that bed for 365 days. We expect that touch point to be rare and brief. And the only way it's rare and brief is that we are providing rapid assistance for individuals into housing with supports. Thank you, Member Martinez, for identifying that the success of an individual, regardless if it's been a short period of time they're experiencing homelessness or if it's been an extended chronic kind of sense of chronicity in their homelessness, if I don't have supports, if I don't have someone that reminds me that, hey, I probably need to make sure I'm talking to the landlord if I'm having problems with my neighbor and not just banging on the wall. There are things that we take for granted because we have been housed. We have been consistently and stably housed that when I have had a significant period of homelessness are no longer just a part of my everyday thought process. Having those supports that help an individual ground back into the things that we lovingly take for granted that become very important when I'm a new tenant, when I am trying to establish what is it like to be independent again, are essential in how we create flow in the system and ensure that those individuals do not return from being stably housed back into homelessness. I think the most disservice that we can provide an individual is to help them move out of homelessness only to land back in the shelter. You'll see as you go through our health and housing, maintaining and monitoring referrals to our behavioral health providers. We have had partners that come into Anchorage weekly that partner with our HOPE team to ensure that we have real-time access to behavioral health supports when they're going out and they're doing that community engagement. We continue to partner on our own internal strategy for the 10,000 homes and establishing those relationships for funding. Very grateful to say that the Homeless Leadership Council, HLC, has been a partner with us at the table to say, how do we help? AHFC has come to the table to say, how do we help you leverage dollars so that we don't see individuals continuing to experience literal homelessness? What I will call your attention to is that as you're reading through the document, there aren't any elements of our system that we've put forward to the Assembly that have not been articulated in our strategy. We have identify and launch warming sites from January to March. What we've learned from our data is how critically important warming is to our overall continuum. So you will hear later today at 1 o'clock as we discuss an extension of warming that helps us leverage that emergency rental assistance, but also just the number of individuals that have touched that service. We've had over 1,300 unique individuals touch warming. Those individuals then have access to other services. I'm going to acknowledge very candidly, many had one touch point and self-resolve. Self-resolve means maybe they independently went into the shelter, maybe they moved in with friends or family. It was an uncomfortable night where they needed somewhere to go until there was something else. We don't have data on what it means when there was just that individual touch point, but recognizing in that immediate need, when there was a crisis, a person had somewhere to go when the shelter was unavailable. As we look towards the next 18 months, we are very excited about our microunits project. It states in here that we are establishing consistent low barrier scatter site winter shelter, ongoing rapid rehousing and case management, the ongoing 200 beds. Well, it won't be at East 56. We wanted to make sure that we had that in there just in case we weren't able to move to a separate location, that it's been articulated. But the absolute goal is to move towards our scatter site model. We are also very interested in identifying opportunities for day shelter. We have heard from the body, from our community members and individuals with lived experience that somewhere to go during the day is an absolute necessity in helping that individual not just link to service, but remembering that sometimes I just need somewhere to sit down where I feel safe. That is one of our next goals that you will all be hearing more about. With that, for the sake of time, I will pause to see if you have any questions.
Thank you. Yes, we'll start off with Member Braga.
Thank you. I just appreciate so much all that you're doing. One of the questions that came to mind is someone emailed me about, she regularly donates at East 56th, and I guess there was a call out for clothing for summer camping, and she was kind of alarmed. And I said I would ask the question. In the past, there's been tents and sleeping bags and clothing, and we're hoping that the outdoor camping is diminished and really feel like that might just set the stage that we're accepting that we want the camping to happen, and we're hoping that's not the case. Other things is we did a lot of work to identify areas of town that were a no-go, never camp, in last spring, which was paved bike trails near bodies of water, near playgrounds, near schools, and near the shelters. And it would be really nice if those areas were signed. And we've seen some help with near Chauncey Muldoon Park, where there were signs that did look like people were in general paying attention to them, at least somewhat. And so that would be nice. And the $5 million toward rental assistance is so exciting, but I continue to ask if, with the supports, if there's also an ask. I know that there's a lot of behavioral health options coming online, and I feel like if there's not a push towards it, we're housing, here's your part of the bargain, we're going to be back to cycling the same people in and out. So those were my concerns and thoughts.
Through the chair, Member Bronga, I was not tracking that there was a call out for camping gear, so I will round back with the shelter provider and provide some follow up there. But I agree with you. A call out in that very direct way does make it seem that the municipality is saying, "Okay, go forth and camp." And I want to reiterate that that is in no way something that we support. There will be ongoing abatement and enforcement. To your question about abatement, we have starting probably in December, ensuring that after every abatement that we are posting signage. Many of the locations that individuals were camping did not have no camping signs or no trespassing signs. So as a part of our protocol is ensuring that we have those signs up in recognition of what you're saying, so that it allows for APD officers to engage and be very clear that you can't be here, that there's a sign. Alongside that, I will, again, intentionally be redundant, is ensuring that we have outreach and that we have a place to navigate folks. I believe the second thing that you asked was about the 5 million rental assistance. I think transparency is always best. We can lead a horse to the water. We will make sure that there's case management. We will make sure that individuals, when they are moving and using our rental assistance, that they are linked to these supports. But we can't always make people engage in those services. What we can do is ensure that there's that ongoing communication, commitment from the case management, because most folks aren't just resistant to doing something to be resistant. It's unknown, it's uncomfortable. And it is really about that relationship between the case manager and that person to say, you know, you need treatment. Well, it's maybe if we talk to someone about, you know, the fact that you're getting blackout drunk every night, and it could just be a recovery meeting. It starts with building of that relationship and leading that person to making the decision for themselves versus saying, well, we're just going to mandate that you do this thing, or you're not going to be able to move into housing. We know that they're comfortable being outside. So that is not a threat that is going to create any return on investment.
I appreciate that. And one more follow-up on the areas that are just going to be non-tolerated for camping. If as shelter ramps down, if there's some sort of communication to people in them that, you know, this summer is going to be different. I hope there's a plan to educate individuals about where we're going to be especially strict on camping this summer might be helpful.
Thank you for the feedback. Yes, we'll talk about that.
Thank you. Member Johnson?
Yeah, thank you. First off, I want to say I appreciate this strategic framework you've laid out. You know, I mean, looking big picture, long term, this feels like the right moves to try and get us towards that functional zero. That is our ultimate goal.
Absolutely.
But thinking a little bit more about the near term and really just kind of tying into what Member Bronga already articulated, looking ahead to this year in terms of what I strongly believe is the most significant public safety hazard to Anchorage is it's not earthquakes or volcanoes, it's fire. And a fire will happen, and then we don't know when and we don't know how bad, but it's coming. And when we look at what happened to Lahaina and Malibu, potential for that to occur in Anchorage is very, very real. And I worry that when that fire happens, that there is a good chance it will have started from a camp, right? We've seen historical evidence of that, and the conditions this year are expected to be particularly bad. So I'll say I'm pretty open-minded in terms of how we manage that, whether it's creating allowed places for people to camp, if it's prioritizing areas where people should not be camping, if it's funding shelter space. Like, there's a lot I'm willing to potentially get on board with, to just be realistic about how we go about addressing this problem, right? We can't just say homelessness is illegal, don't be it anymore, right? But I do think it is important from my perspective that we just be emphatic that we are not taking a permissive attitude towards camping. And I think you guys have already kind of touched on that, but I just want to say it more emphatically, that these camps are a significant hazard to Anchorage, right? Beyond the damage it does to our businesses and our public spaces and tourist industry and all that, et cetera. Like, it is a very real and present danger. And I would look forward to hearing more from you guys about how we're going to protect the city this summer from that threat.
Through the chair, Member Johnson, thank you for that. It is a part of our ongoing conversation. Very grateful that I don't have to be the subject matter expert in all things. And so our partners with Parks and Recreation absolutely help us in when we're following our prioritization language in Title 15 for abatement, but identifying where we have known threats, wildfire fuels based on camps, and then past history of where we saw fires that happened that really devastated parts of Anchorage, kind of the Campbell Creek fire a few years ago. So it is absolutely a part of our ongoing weekly conversation.
Good, thank you.
Excellent. I don't see any additional questions, so if you want to continue. I don't, thank you.
Good morning, Dia Agnew-Benben. I just wanted to provide a couple additional updates on some of the specific items that are in the strategy document. Related to the one that talks about supporting the development of a full behavioral health crisis continuum. We've, as you know, convened an interdepartment work group that's been coming together to really look at the services that we provide and try to figure out how can we improve our response. So a few things that are happening currently that we'll be looking forward to reporting back out as they move along. One, of course, is the HOPE team is really looking to develop a kind of network because, as you know, there's two people and they're conducting that outreach. It would be really wonderful if we could have a really good network to kind of hand people off to that can continue to do that case management and navigation support. And we're seeing that network as also a resource for another effort that I think you've heard us speak about, which is pre-arrest diversion to treatment. So we're really bringing, and now that APD has also brought Steve Williams on board, we have another person who can help bring those providers together, but also to continue the conversations that we need to have with our legal department, the court system, and kind of get that whole thing rolling. So that's something we're putting a lot of time into right now. One of the things that is a priority and a little bit of low-hanging fruit when it comes to behavioral health crisis response is making sure we're really using the care line, which is a resource that we have that serves across Alaska. And what we know from their data is that right now about 22% of their calls come from Anchorage. We're over 40% of the population, so really we should be probably close to double that. We've had for a couple of years now the ability for 911 to immediately divert a call to Caroline if they think that's appropriate, but it's been very underutilized. And also, as you know, we have both a dispatch at APD and an AFD dispatch, and the AFD dispatch hasn't been sending calls to Caroline. So that criteria has been changed recently, and the training to dispatcher has been changed. So we'll be monitoring how we can get more calls sent over there, because otherwise a lot of those calls will come to our mobile crisis team, and then they're spending time on the phone with someone when really we would like them to be out on the street and doing the work that they're so good at doing. We're also have started to change the criteria around the safety patrol and safety center so that we can really be maximizing that resource as well. As you know, it's come under the fire department this year, so that's allowing us to really coordinate the response that they're able to provide alongside the mobile crisis team and, of course, the mobile intervention teams at APD. In terms of one of our other goals, which is developing a place to go, we, you know, as you all know, there's going to be a pretty amazing crisis stabilization center available to us the middle of next year. And we got an update on that yesterday, and it's pretty exciting to see what they're doing at South Central Foundation. But in the meantime, our first responders don't really have a place to go. And when Frena was describing some of the rationale around warming and the data we're seeing there, that is a location where hospitals, when they discharge someone in the middle of the night, or when APD or AFD needs a place to go, they often will go to warming or one of our shelter sites that really aren't equipped for people who are having some level of health need that needs to be addressed. So we have applied for some funding from the state. We just put that application in probably a couple of weeks ago to start to develop some crisis stabilization services here that would be more of a medium level. So not doing the whole approach that South Central Foundation will be doing, but doing one that hopefully would meet our needs at least somewhat. So we will be able to keep you posted on that as well. I did want to just add about the micro units project. We had a really good planning session at the beginning of the month on April 2nd. I think we probably had about 60 people come either in person or virtually. So we got a ton of great input from them. We did some really short presentations from Julie Graham came from In Our Backyard and shared about their project. And then we also had Carl Soderstrom from True North Recovery, who operates recovery residences in the Valley. So he talked about their program model. Those are basically the two components that we're hoping to take to scale here in Anchorage is reproduce some version of the type of structure that In Our Backyard is using, and then implement the model of a recovery residence that True North is operating successfully in the Valley. So we got a bunch of great input. And then another thing that Julie did was arrange for Farina and I to go and meet with the residents at In Our Backyard and get their feedback on the project and the units. And that was super helpful. So we learned a lot from there. We have a meeting coming up with funders this week to see if we have some community partnership. We do have some muni funding identified, but we're hoping that it can be leveraged with some community partnership funds. And then we also are in the process of selecting muni sites. And as Farina mentioned, DOT is interested in potentially providing some locations. So we've been looking at that as well. So we should have a kind of proposal that includes sites and funding and more specifics about the model to bring forward to the assembly, I'd say in the next month or two, probably within 2 months, I would say. Yeah.
Right on. We have a question, Member Johnson.
Yeah, I think first statement, then question. Excited about the micro unit stuff. So really looking forward to that briefing and glad you guys are going after that enthusiastically. Also say I'm excited to hear about this idea of pre-arrest aversion to treatment. And it sounds like maybe that's a work in progress. One, I think just generally that's probably a better use of scarce resources and more likely to lead to the change of behavior we want. I guess my hope would be that as we're contemplating this, that we make sure that it's structured in a way that feels like it has some teeth, right? I mean, especially if we're talking about something that's potentially an arrestable offense, I would not want to simply give somebody a pass based on some vague promise that they will call a phone number to see about getting into a program, right? I would hope that we structure this in a way that if there's not follow through, consequences still exist. So just putting that out there, and maybe it's something we can hear more about later when it's a little bit more fleshed out.
Yeah, I can share kind of through the chair. Member Johnson, yeah, absolutely. So we've been having conversations specifically about that. So which are the charges that would potentially be ones that would be eligible for this? Who would be the participating providers, and what would be the kind of contract that a person would have in place with them? And then what would be the internal process around those charges if somebody doesn't fulfill the contract that they've made around the treatment services, and how would that proceed? So that's exactly the conversation we've been having. And like I said, with Steve Williams coming on board, we're going to have the policies and procedures fleshed out and kind of much more detail to share in the next few months.
Great, thank you. Is this ultimately just going to be an internal policy change, or were you talking about a change in code? I mean, what?
We're not sure yet. In our first pass through it doesn't totally appear that we necessarily need to change code. But it's really more about the mechanics of the program, but there may be some, but we haven't identified any so far.
Okay, thanks. When it's a little bit more, when you guys get more figured out, I really hope you come back to this committee and talk about it further. Thanks.
Excellent. I have just a flashback question that I didn't ask Farina earlier. When you mentioned 1,300 unique, what is the definition of unique? Unique to what?
Thank you, Member Martinez. When we say unique individuals, that's not a duplicated count. So we have had on the data sheet a total of 5,217 clients served at warming. Keep in mind that is not a deduplicated. So we've had 1,381 unique individuals. So they may have had multiple touch points to get to that 5,000, but one unique individual deduplicated.
That's substantial.
Yes.
The follow-up, and probably it's not maybe it's not answerable at this point, is how does that juxtapose to the number we saw at the big dashboard number, right? And so I think there seems to be a rub somewhere in there with respect to a clearer picture and potentially just getting, to your point, the outputs more aligned to understanding kind of what's happening in the entirety of the continuum.
Absolutely.
Well,
I will respond. Member Martinez, we have in that data, 743 only used the service one time. So when we think about it juxtaposed to the data that the coalition presented, I think it supports where they talk about inflow. And when we think about the number of individuals, to Member Branca's question to Ms. Parks, if the individuals in delay on the park strip haven't actually touched any service, so I might have gone into Third Avenue Navigation Center and I asked to speak to someone, but they asked me, do I want to do a coordinated entry assessment that puts me into the data tracking system? I could say no. So when we're looking at who's actually utilizing the service, it's very hard to say that this is a separate group of individuals that aren't included in the coalition's data, but it does allow us to have those meaningful conversations about what we're seeing and who's using the warming service, the number of individuals that we have identified as currently unhoused. I do want to also share with the committee that we had 245 individuals were transferred from warming into shelter. So then they would have been connected into our HMIS system so that they are getting connected and they are a part of that count.
And Chair, could I just add?
yeah, yes.
So I think the other box that's on the, excuse me, the dashboard that the coalition showed is that we have about 1,760 people in shelter. And I think part of what the data analysis that Henning and RRS did on the warming data showed that a lot of people also had interactions with shelter. So when I first saw the 1,300 number, I was like, because I was imagining they're separate. But I think, in fact, it's really more about people missing curfew, people having left their bed, and then the bed goes to somebody else, so they're out of luck for that night. And then, of course, remember, it's happening January to March. So these are cold nights when even people who might be outside some of the time are potentially going to come in. So I think it's a super helpful data point to know that there's about 1,400 people who are at the point at some time in 3 months where they need to go to warming for a couple hours. I mean, it's a really important number for us. And I think it's really not, to me, totally different than what we've been imagining, because we have about 1,000 shelter beds when you look at kind of just across the community. And then you think over the winter, we had 532 beds in addition to that. And so to me, it's indicating that same population. But we certainly have more we could learn from that data.
Right on, thank you. Is there anything else, or are you all done?
We're done.
Right on. Thank you for the presentation. And we're going to move on to the Health Department for a general update from Director Rash.
Good morning, Kimberly Rash, Anchorage Health Department. I have 3 items that I just want to bring your attention to. They are going to be coming up to the body either next week or early in May. The first item is on the agenda for the 22nd. It is AM 346-2025, which is a 3-year shelter licenses for 5 current shelters. So in 2021, AO 2021-55S1 as amended code was updated to include the licensing of shelters, and a license is required as of January 1st, 2023. So during this time period, the health department worked on putting together policies and procedures, worked on putting the application together and getting it going. We did have some provisional licenses during that time period. But the entities that you will see next week, which are the Anchorage Rescue Gospel Mission, Brother Francis, Clare House, Complex Care, and Covenant House have all met the requirements set forth and will be in front of you next week. The next one is a unnumbered AR. It is a resolution for approval to extend the capacity of 200 individuals at 1111 East 56th Avenue. So currently, as we know, in code, shelter capacity can only be set at 150 individuals, and the health department has to come forth to the body requesting an additional capacity of 50. And so the shelter has been operating at a 200 level capacity for some time now. And so we are just requesting that we continue to extend that shelter capacity until Q4 of this year, which will allow us to not only continue to serve the individuals at that shelter, but also work on our plans for the scattered site shelter model. The last one that I have is a grant agreement with ICA. ICA is the software system that is behind HMIS. And as we continue to require the utilization of HMIS from shelter providers, we need to look at funding. Without continued support from our partners, including us as a participating jurisdiction, which is the health department, there could be potentially users and or project fees, as it could directly impact grants that are provided to those entities. And so the AM that's set forth is asking for approval of $156,000 to provide to ICA for their continued maintenance of that system. Unfortunately, I do think we are going to have to postpone that item because the accompanying item, which is the substantial amendment number 12 to our HUD action plan, was delayed and on base. So those two documents have to come together because one is the funding and the other one is the appropriating the grant agreement. And so right now, just a grant agreement is in front of you as of next week. So I'm going to have to ask to postpone that one until we can get the other one, which again is that funding arm alongside. And those are the three items that I just wanted to bring your attention to.
Thank you, Director Rash. We'll start off with Member Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. This is just something to think about, but would love your initial thoughts. So on the topic of expanding from 150 to 200. So I remember all of the discussion. I know all the reasons why we said 150, and I think there is a lot of reason to have a limit. But basically for the last couple years, at least, every time that we have expanded that capacity to 200, it's just passed. So I just wonder, just something to think about for the future. Does it make sense to amend code to allow 200 to be the maximum? And that's not something to work on right now, but I just, because again, if we always do something and always approve it, and we have found that there has not been a substantial negative impact of those extra 50 people, it's just something to think about. But again, I know that opens a can of worms that people will remember. So I also just want to say, I do clearly support keeping a limit in code and making that limit reasonable. Thanks.
Excellent. Just go back for a second to make sure if I heard it correctly. And were you requesting, and have you requested already from the chair and the leadership of the assembly around a postponement of an item? Was that what you were describing?
I have not brought that forth to the assembly body yet. Most likely I will go through Becky and then Becky
Right on.
will.
Cool. Just making sure that you flag that for us. It preemptively is going to be helpful. And if I can just, I don't see another question in the queue at this time. I'll just go back to the 3-year licensing. Essentially, what does that represent for us in terms of any opportunity of retooling, of reorganizing any of the work into the strategy, or are they meeting the strategic goals we want them to meet from the vantage point of reauthorizing the 3-year, or is it an opportunity for us to get more out of what we want from our providers in a strategic way?
Yeah, great question. So back in 2021, when it was written in code, it was really just ensuring the health and safety of individuals residing within those shelter systems. So it's licensing that component of that shelter, making sure that there is a valid fire inspection, making sure that there are certain policies and procedures that protect the individuals that are residing within those shelters. And so when you look at code, it's really focused around that piece of it. And another piece of that is just making sure that those shelters are continually working within their communities to assess any issues that are arising and making sure that those are addressed timely.
Right on, thank you. And just to make sure I'm clear about it, thank you to those providers for stepping up into this work for so long, and for continuing to be present with it. The last question I have is around HMIS and the data system. Essentially, seems like a basic question. Do we have the capacity? I remember a vision when this system was being imagined and developed. I happened to be a special assistant in an administration that roomed with the homeless coordinator at that time, who was bringing this work together. So we had a lot of interaction and overlap. And I remember the values that Ms. Brown mentioned, which was short, brief, kind of like what we want for the experience to be, not lingering, quickly get back into integration. But we also had the idea, as best as I could recall, that we would have a by name list. We would know where folks went, and there would be no wrong door because we would be able to refer them at the whatever point of contact with the information from the HMIS that we can then refer them effectively rather than in the loop-to-loop way that was a kind of a broken model. So the question I have is essentially the indicator of whether that's working for me. I will take it from a model of criminal justice. If I ask the police who are the biggest offenders in Anchorage, they can tell me. They can tell me who's on the top list because they got multiple felonies out. They could just tell me essentially. And when we did a round them up kind of collaboration with the federal authorities around breaking some of the gangs and the violent groups that were stealing and robbing cars, and this was kind of a big thing of several years back. You know, we got to the place where we were able to determine that if we effectively enforced on a handful of people who were responsible for 70+% of all the interactions, we would effectively change the landscape. And we did. And that's not an issue anymore. I mean, we've broken those particular. So, to the extent that we can tell, do we know who similarly are the biggest pullers of resources without the punitive lane of criminality, just thinking, how do we meet the needs better if that's true?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's, I don't know the answer to that specific question. This funding is really just to ensure that there is a continued maintenance of that system and that the system continues to be something that is used within all of the shelter sites. So the Anchorage Health Department, any grant that we grant out, we require that they utilize this system so that there is data so that, like Ms. Brown and Thea and Ms. Parks talked about, and it can spit out the information that we need. Now, in regards to the information that's contained in there, I would have to refer probably back to ACH and get some more information from them.
Chair, so I think your analogy to the criminal justice system is a really good one. And I know it's confusing when we speak about HMIS and then coordinated entry. So HMIS is really the whole system. So like it's a giant database. Just imagine like a giant Excel spreadsheet. And so anytime I, go into a shelter site or I encounter somebody in street outreach, that's going to get recorded in HMIS, all those encounters, and they'll be recorded to my name, assuming I give my name, right? And so depending on the level of permission you have in that database, you can see all of that. When you're a provider, you usually can just see what's going on in your project. So there are different levels of permission. When we talk about coordinated entry, that requires a different kind of intake, in the sense that we used to have a very lengthy assessment that people, if you've been around a while, you remember VI Spadet. That used to be like literally like 2 to 3 hour encounter where you told your entire life history. So at some point we realized, hey, that's a barrier for vulnerable people. Nobody wants to do that. So we're not actually getting the most vulnerable people on this list for vulnerable people. That's a problem, right? So we changed that. Now we really can pull people's level of vulnerability by looking at the number of disabling conditions that they have, which is a much quicker question, their age, and then how long, or, for, it doesn't have to be all one length of time homeless, but sort of what's their cumulative time homeless. And so when we say that someone's on coordinated entry, they're going to be closer to the top of the list as determined by those 3 factors. If they have more disabling conditions, if they're older, and if they've had more cumulative time homeless. And again, that is all by name. So and that is how, like Farina mentioned, that's how we got people into shelter this year. That's how people prioritize for exits to housing for some programs, not all, just the ones that are funded by HUD that requires them to use coordinated entry. We can send people to other programs without having to follow that list. So that data is there. I mean, I think when I just was having this conversation earlier today about what data we need. I think in some ways it's about deciding what are the metrics we really want to monitor. And then I would bet you, because Jessica's pretty much a genius with the pulling reports out of HMIS, that we can pull that data together. There's probably some things we're not tracking that you might want to know about, but I think a lot of them, like employment, income, length of time, returns to homelessness, all that is in the system. So it's really more about deciding sort of what's our theory of change, and then we can start putting that dashboard together and monitoring that for you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Cool, right on. Yeah, thank you, Director Rash. And there are no additional items. We'll close those parts of our agenda, and we are into public comments. Are there any folks here for public comments? Are there anybody on the line? Travis, do you know? Right on, cool. So if there's no one on the line, if you are, just make sure you are getting our attention, but we'll begin with public comments. We'll set the timer, Travis. Feel free to come on. Again, just state your name and what part of town you are in, and we'll begin the timer of 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Miss Sophia O'Neill, and I'm a resident of Eagle River. There exist those that truly see the best way to recover from any harm, and that is to tell. Tell what is seen, experienced, learned in time, to thereby empower themselves or those that can't speak for themselves. The goal, so others that may listen, may elicit change, will gain perspective. The truth, often unless experienced, a listener can't relate. For example, if a listener witnesses flashbacks, delusions of substance abuse, or perhaps traumas they see like TBI or exposure to chemical warfare, or the wounds that can't be readily seen. Well, I've seen it all, and the intention of those that earnestly, honestly share, sometimes intensely, is not to reflect judgment back on those that judge, but rather to earnestly seek understanding, perhaps help by relating. Sharing is absolutely dependent on the individual, but the common intent I found by those that do share is to inspire listeners that may be able to make changes. A profoundly marginalized society exists, plagued with a mosaic of questions, but predominantly, please listen to me. And if placed amongst mass stereotypes, ignoring specifics, the marginalized may become victims, who are then forced to coincide and cope dealing with those against society, having no crime committed. Too often people are grouped by limited information and face a non-informational mindset that doesn't research answers to the status quo. Having not a foundation of research, in fact, often only fragments, there is no way to relationally conceive that people speaking up, this isn't to challenge anyone entity, but to rather empower simply a different perspective, leading to a dismantling of a larger accepted groupthink of what it means to be disenfranchised, void of what that term actually encompasses. To be marginalized is a complicated problem with a complicated sum of factors that must be broken down into specifics to truly assist. A personal experience willing to be shared, it empowers problem solving and long-term solutions and can be derived from nuances found in listening. The art and respect of active listening. This act of research encourages problem solving by specialization, and amidst one will come to the realization of multiple associations. It is important not to interrupt, finish another's thought, or attempt to sum up an individual speaking their truth. And those that listen and use this actual knowledge bravely shared, knowledge that was hard sought and given most honestly, will succeed in long-term solutions, but only if listening is done objectively. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want me to shut it off?
Next, please state your name and what part of town you're in. Thank you.
My name is Ronald Leva, and presently I'm in this part of town. But my businesses are located downtown, Mountain View, I guess, and I live in Rogers Park. First of all, I said I wouldn't come back here and make presentations, but after a recent demonstration challenging, I guess, our president, I feel democracy is still alive in Anchorage and hope still exists. And if anything reinforces it, it's those two people over there who have open minds and are dedicated to solving this problem. I'm very proud of them. The city should be proud that they're on the staff and working to end homelessness. One of the presentations, since you haven't bought my land and it is in a unique location, and for 3 years no one has, I'm modifying my business plan to do a presentation to Habitat for Humanity. And with this, I want to convert my industrial lot into a donation and recycling center and actually use recycled goods and have a training center like with the carpenters to use recycled items, lumber, plumbing, electrical, to build the tiny homes. And if the goal is 10,000 homes in 10 years, then I think sweat equity, recycling, including separation of plastic bottles that have been shredded with it's a mobile extrusion machine. You heat up the plastic and push out 2x4s. And all these spruce trees that are being cut, portable mill would make slab lumber, firewood, furniture. So the goal is housing. The biggest problem facing Anchorage is housing. So with Habitat, and they have a big store, I can fill it twice. I'm going to donate items, receive donated items, allow them to use my lot. We can test this on a pilot program and see if it's productive. That way it'll be self-sustaining, meaning the finances will be in a sales lot and it'll be put back in to housing. It's a great organization founded by, of course, Jimmy Carter. I was very proud to shake his hand. He had a good message, a good goal, actually a mission. And since I'm protected by the Arbor of Salvation, you can do no more harm to me. I will deflect that. And you can take my money, and I'm having a rough time financially, but you will not take my spirit, my mission, or my values. So look forward to the presentation. I hope to meet with the board, and I hope it's a successful endeavor.
Thank you, Mr. Oliva.
Do you have any questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Oliva. Good luck with your program. Please state your name and where you live. Thank you.
My name's Randy, Mountain View. Thank you for everyone that's here. I really appreciate this opportunity. I've been in Mountain View for 7 years now, homeless, and been through pretty much everything, experienced it all. I've made 2 attempts so far going through the shelter system, and both times, first of all, I guess I was in the Marine Corps for 12 years. I know a little bit about discipline, and yet still the number one thing is the curfew thing when it comes to going to these shelters. And I struggled with that, and that led to me leaving the system without discussion on why. I'm a mechanic by trade, and without a business location, one of the great things about Mountain View and the car wash is you can rent a bay for $40 for the entire night. Well, that falls under the time frame I can't be outside. And since I don't have the W-2s to show that I was actually working, I then get kicked out. I've been back out on the streets again, lost my phone, lost everything I have, and have no means to get back into the system because everything is gone again. So it's a struggle. And the biggest thing I think is, like the lady said earlier, active listening. And it is personal. Every single person out there needs to feel wanted. They have to know that someone cares about them. Without that, they're not going to try. If it comes to the alcohol or the drug abuse, if they can't get into shelter first and feel like they have something and have a purpose and are cared about, why would they want to quit those things when that's all they have to hold on to? That's where it leads to. When you feel like you have nothing left, that's the answer to feel comfort. And if you can't get rid of that tomorrow and go back to a 9 to 5, then you're stuck out there. And it's not feasible. It's not attainable for anyone by any means. So 3 strikes, you're out. And when you show up at 11:05 for the shelter, I mean, no one even asked me once about why I was late. Whether it be my first time on the weekend, not knowing the bus schedule, that was one of them. Daylight savings time, that was another one. Those things were never discussed. It's just, you're late 3 times, get out. Next person in the bed. And who am I to them? Just a number. So I'm hoping that the plans for the future are more personable, and someone would know my name, not just a number. And there's a lot of people I know I can make it, and there's a lot of people I know that need help that I wouldn't send them through any of these programs. I can't. Half these people can't even breathe and or take care of themselves hygienically. So how are you supposed to expect them to follow all these rules when I know I've struggled with it, and I didn't think I'd struggle that bad.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
First of all, I appreciate you for being here. Thank you for sharing your lived experience. And I see the person, Randy.
Thank
You're
you.
not a number. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we have time for one more just on the clock, if members are cool. And I see another person here. So please state your name for the record and what part of town you live in, and we'll close with this final.
Okay, Jamie Lopez, East
Unless
Anchorage.
there's more.
Oh, what?
Thank you,
Start
Jamie.
again.
No.
Jamie Lopez, East Anchorage, formerly Coalition, formerly Homeless. A little under the weather, unprepared remarks. So, poverty has existed for a millennia. It's not going away anytime soon. It is a lofty goal to want to end homelessness. But the unfortunate factor that is not included in the plan is how you address the next day and the next day and the next day after that. The rules of survival are very much different from the rules of civilization. And you see this with a letter recently in ADN talking about all the fires that are going on at one particular camp. People like this, when they do not have experience with adversity, they don't seem to understand. Either you chop down wood and you burn it, or you find money to pay for propane, or you risk frostbite or death. And so while the plan is there, you have to support people day after day after day after day. Try to provide fire extinguishers. Fire department is not doing now. They can't. They're not getting donated. There are other things that I could potentially talk about, but I do want to thank Randy for coming, because Randy is one of the good ones at Davis Park. The Muni wasn't doing much at all to pick up the trash. Sometimes you try to approach them. They won't give you 2 trash bags. Well, you're talking about people who cannot afford trash bags, and then you try to get them. What are you supposed to do with the garbage? There are contractors all over town that dump things in the dumpster there, and they fill it up. So I approached Lions Club and I said, look, there are good people out there, ones that actually want to pick up after the irresponsible ones. If you can give us some rakes, some trash bags, some trash pickers, things like this, the responsible people will pick up after the irresponsible ones. And so approached Robert, chair of Lions Club. He said, sure. So he went ahead and gave us the stuff. I passed out food from about 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. a couple weeks back, about 2 weeks back. And Randy was picking up all along the front of Lions Park, and other people did as well. And so the whole point about this is, housing's the goal. It's not going to be there for a very long time. Mr. Martinez, I do believe you just saw that, the unique hits in the system don't match with HMIS. For a number of months, they were saying 475 outside, 475 next month, 450, 450, 475. And then they stopped producing data, as of December 31st, because I was raising awareness to this as well as other things. And so now they list 511, but they have the inactive count, which is over 700. They don't know where those people are. It doesn't mean they stop existing or go into the ether. They are still there. They are still outside, and they need help. And so what I would ask this assembly and as well as the meeting to consider is a longer term discussion about working the problem, because housing is not the only solution that's out there. You're going to have people outside for years and years and years before you build this housing, and you need to support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Members have agreed to extend for a couple extra minutes for another testimony. So please come forward. Thank you. And state your name and what part of town. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Art Ivanov. I live downtown, and I ran into, I'll start my testimony with the fact that I ran into a cousin of mine 3 months ago. He lives on the street, and he was having a few drinks with friends, and we got to talking, and I went to the University of Alaska Fairbanks with him. His wife passed away about 10 years ago. And I know substance abuse is a really huge problem within the Native community. There's been some discussion about partnership and collaboration, yet I don't see the Alaska Native community involved in this process. You talk about 53% of those that are homeless are Alaska Native. There's a real need to hit the reset button with your relationship with the Native community and get us engaged so that we're part of the solution. And I think it's essential. I mean, I cruise around with my bicycle all the time, and I see these people, and just it's painful to see, and you realize, they don't have a home, they don't have family. There's a need for greater collaboration. I'd suggest that in this effort, that perhaps we consider hosting a conference with the 12 regional corporations to talk about homelessness, but also coming up with the resources to deal with this crisis. It's a crisis. We've drafted up an agenda, we drafted up a letter of invite to the regional corporations, and we want to be part of the solution. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, that's all I have. I just felt really passionate about it after running into Glenn, and it was like, all right, we said in our closing comment, he said a prayer, he hugged me, and these are the people that we need to help. And Mr. Chair, I just think there's more that the Native community can do to help in this process. You talked about mental health, and you talk about, where's the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium? Where are the other entities that are involved with Native communities that could be a part of the solution? And we certainly have an interest. I have an interest to help where I can to find a solution. 53%, That's a staggering number, and it's a crisis. Mr. Chair, I really thank you for taking the opportunity to hear my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Ivanov, for being with us today. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned at 12:34.